Okay, I'm going to make some comments about the closing of the Mount Vernon Animal Shelter. So let me share my screen. Okay, so the city has decided to close the animal shelter and contract with the Humane Society of Westchester and New Rochelle instead. The initial contract amount will be $135,000. It'll save the city around 50%. Maybe, yeah, I think somewhere around that. The chief of staff Reed said 55%. Let's just quickly look at budget appropriations. Here's the animal shelter proposed budget numbers. Here, so 2023, the proposal is about the same as it was back in 2020. So $135,000 contract with the Humane Society, that I think is going to come out of this line. And then the salary is going to be for the warden. I want to just juxtapose these two articles that appear recently on News 12. One, Mount Vernon rebounding, and then next to that, the animal shelter closing. I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition. Really what I'm going to do is we're going to listen to comments from Lynn Smith from the Friends of the Mount Vernon Animal Shelter. These were all comments made at the 12/4 City Council meeting. And then the response to that from Chief of Staff Reed, and then a couple comments from Caitlin Gleason. Her committee has oversight of the animal shelter. And then the City Council President, Derek Thompson. The other three council members really didn't make any comments about it. They all thanked the Friends of the Mount Vernon Animal Shelter for their volunteer service to the shelter, but they didn't say anything else. I'm going to jump over to Lynn Smith's comments now. I add some captioning around things that I think are kind of key points, and I will pause and comment perhaps while we're going through this.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Friends of Mount Vernon Shelter Animals, which is a nonprofit group that exists to support the shelter. There's other people here tonight, some on Zoom, and they're mostly dedicated volunteers and supporters of the shelter. And in many cases, they've been helping for years. You know, they walk dogs, visit cats, clean cages, help animals find homes, do whatever needs to be done. And I think they just want to know what will happen to the animals that are currently in the shelter with the change. And I'm sure they'd like to know if there's anything, that they can do to still be involved. I'm only speaking for the Friends group, which includes Melissa Romita and Simone Prado. The other members of our group couldn't be here tonight. We think that the agreement with the Humane Society of Westchester will probably be a good thing. Time will tell. We all know the shelter has had many issues over the years, and that maintaining the facility has been a difficult financial commitment. We trust that the city is acting in good faith and doing the best thing for the animals. However, we want to point out that the city's role will not be over when you sign this contract. There's still going to be issues that have to be tended to in the city from the city side. Friends of Mount Vernon Shelter Animals has a vested interest in the shelter, as we've been supporting it for almost 10 years. We fund vet care, animal training, enrichment activities, and basically help with anything that no one else wants to or can do. We pay for trainers to evaluate and train dogs to make them easier to place. We purchase supplies, we help find homes, we assist with transportation. We bought the shelter's HVAC and security systems, the backyard shed, a new front door.
Okay, so that is indicative of what we're dealing with here. Those go beyond supplemental services, an HVAC and security system. This volunteer group provided those things. In my estimation, those would be the responsibility of the city. And so the city, and it's not just now. I know people are like, oh, it's not, don't blame this administration. This administration is just a continuation of what has not been done for this shelter in prior administrations. But I think a HVAC system, a security system, and a new front door, I would put those more as essential services rather than supplemental services?
Our primary role has been to fund specialty vet care for sick and injured animals that a municipal shelter could never afford. We spent more than $20,000 to help those two emaciated injured dogs you might have seen on News 12 a while ago. This year alone, we spent a total of $90,000 on vet care for more than 75 dogs and cats in the shelter. And this is on top of what the city spent for basic services. We care a lot about these animals, and we'd like to stay involved. So we're asking to be part of the transition, in making sure that all the animals have a place to go and have their needs addressed before moving to another facility.
So that it just sounds to me like this group, Mount Vernon, Friends of the Mount Vernon Shelter Animals, was caught by surprise by this, which is really unfortunate because here's a group of residents that for a decade has provided more than supplemental services. They've provided essential care for these animals. And it sounds, based on what she's saying, that they were caught off guard by this, that they weren't like the rest of us in the community, were not included in the discussion about the merits of this change. It just seems wrong to me.
There are more than 50 animals in that shelter right now, and that's a huge commitment for anyone to take in that many animals at once. And so they could be waiting in that building for a while. And they need to continue to get stimulation and socialization and be cared for on a daily basis. So for that reason, we're hoping that volunteers will be allowed to continue to keep coming. We'd like to help, Friends would, by using our contacts and asking other rescue groups to pull animals into their organizations. Many of these animals have been in the shelter for quite a while, not due to anything they've done, but because no one knows they're there. For months, the shelter didn't have a phone for people to call to make appointments. The shelter lost its website.
I would say leaving the shelter for months without a phone does not represent effort at all. And to the extent and losing the website, so no one could get through. No one, people who might have been willing to adopt these animals were unable to do it because they couldn't contact the facility and make an appointment because there was no phone. That seems like an egregious level of neglect. And I don't see how anybody could reasonably suggest that that is indicative of great effort. That is indicative of zero effort.
Its Facebook page and followers, and the ability to post animals on the Pet Finder adoption site due to a dispute with a volunteer. So adoptions have been a challenge. We have questions about the warden position that you mentioned in the agreement. We agree it's an important role to maintain, but the person that holds that position has been on leave for almost a year, so we're not sure, what that means. And perhaps most importantly, in the future, how will the city ensure that animals being dumped within city limits are taken in and cared for? Unwanted animals get dropped off regularly in boxes, in crates, and they're just left at the door. The staff gets texted, on a 24-hour basis about dogs that are tied up on street corners, and they have to go get them. Many people are not going to drive to the east end of New Rochelle to safely deliver an animal that they didn't want in the first place. So the city needs a plan to receive those who are abandoned and in need and transfer them to the Humane Society. Friends is a known entity, and the mayor and at least one county council member knows us, and we just hope that you will, respect us and accept our help. So thank you.
All right, let's listen to the chief of staff response.
Good morning, good evening, everyone, and thank you for your comments, and we understand your concerns. So regarding the Mount Vernon Animal Shelter, the City of Mount Vernon is required to either operate a dog shelter or contract shelter services with another municipality or local humane society. Those shelter services do include services for cats and other animals. The Humane Society of Westchester at New Rochelle also has rabbits and other small animals, the same as the Mount Vernon shelter does have. As such, there's this requirement. The city has decided to join 19 other municipalities who also have contracts with the Humane Society of Westchester at New Rochelle. The decision was not made lightly, and was made only after consideration of all factors, most importantly, the animals and the staff and the financial condition of the city.
Okay, so there was a decision-making process that the administration undertook, but they didn't include the community in that discussion at all.
And it's also in line with the promotion of consolidated services by the New York State Comptroller as a viable option for reduction in costs without a reduction in quality of service, with like services provided in a geographic area.
So a reduction in cost without a reduction in quality of service. If that's the goal, then it's already a failure, because if the services just stay the way they are, if the quality doesn't increase, it's a failure. So what we're looking for is to have the cost and somehow increase the quality of care. So we're hoping to get more animal well-being for less money from this arrangement. I think it's certainly plausible to do that, but I don't know that the city has, at least in the 11 years I've lived here, has a good track record of being able to do that.
We have the support of partners on the state and local level that are very familiar with the condition of our shelter over the years and the financial condition of the city. And we would 100% like to acknowledge our gratitude and appreciation of the Friends of the Mount Vernon Shelter Animals for their financial and physical support of the shelter over these past couple of years. Well, not couple of years, over probably what's closer to a decade. We are very grateful. We look forward to a smooth transition, which includes the Friends. We do have a meeting tomorrow scheduled where we'll discuss the animals that are currently in the shelter and the plans for the future. We are still responsible for animal control services, so there will still be someone who's doing animal control within the city of Mount Vernon as required.
Except for, according to what Lynn Smith said, that requirement hasn't been met for a year because the person has been on leave and the city hasn't arranged for backup.
Regarding the warden or any other positions, the city does not discuss publicly any personnel statuses in that way. So just know that we are required to provide animal control services, and we do have a plan for that.
And at this point, it's not enough to just hear, we have a plan for that. I want to see the plan. I think everybody in the community wants to see the plan. What is the plan? Write it down, right? Show us.
And we've also discussed in great detail how the Friends can still be involved, whether it, of course, on a volunteer basis, how we'll go about doing that, whether it's scheduling, transport, or however they choose to be involved. We welcome that and look forward to that discussion tomorrow. Any other, I don't think there were any questions.
Okay, that's it. Let's go now to hear Gleason.
Oh, the animal shelter. Well, I could tell you that it breaks my heart to go down to the animal shelter and see the condition that it's in, but everybody has put such a great effort in.
Like keeping the phone on? Is that what you mean by great effort? By keeping a website up so people can try and adopt animals? Is that what you mean, Ms. Gleason, by great effort?
Whether it be the personnel with the city of Mount Vernon, definitely the Friends of the Animal Shelter. I can't tell you how much, when I go down there and I see how much you guys have given of your own time, your own money, your fundraising events. You know, this is not going to happen tomorrow, okay? But I will tell you personally, I'm not going to let any of those animals go astray. I mean, I'm a huge animal lover. I was happy when the animal shelter came under my committee because I knew that we could make a difference there. Is it disappointing? It's very disappointing that we have to close the animal shelter, but it's not good for the animals. It's not good. they're gonna get sick just by the vermin that's running in and out. And we just don't have the capacity to support that building. It's just impossible.
Yeah, I mean, she's describing the complete failure of a city to fulfill its obligation to what in a couple minutes you'll hear Councilman Thompson call our furry citizens. To say that this is just impossible is just a false belief. It's not just impossible. Other communities have successful animal shelters. Why is it that Mount Vernon cannot have a decent animal shelter? What an indictment of the city. We can't, it's impossible for us to have an animal shelter. Unbelievable.
So on top of the $400,000 that we're spending in our budget to maintain that, you guys spent another $100,000. The Humane Society of Westchester is very well equipped. They have a state-of-the-art facility that's just been built over the last few years. They've assured us that they will be as committed as our volunteers are, as our employees are, and it still falls under my committee, and I'm going to stay on top of it.
Humane Society has assured them. This means that they were aware of it, right? That the city council members were aware of this process and failed to include the community in this discussion over a piece of critical infrastructure. That is the opposite of transparency.
And I make that promise to you guys because I don't want to see any of our animals die for any reason whatsoever. You know, so your outreach is going to be critical. Your outreach is absolutely going to be critical to making sure that the animals are not forgotten and that we get them into homes. So I really appreciate everything that you guys have done. It's just been incredible. Every time the animal shelter needed something, you guys stood up, and we really appreciate it because the city couldn't do as much as you guys have done. So thank you very much.
Well, the city didn't do. Could is a different word, but the city certainly didn't do. It allowed this volunteer group to take over essential services for the animals. Let's listen to what Mr. Thompson has to say.
But in regards to our animal shelter, you know, I love animals, so that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm hoping that we find a great resolve for our furry citizens.
I don't know that you treat citizens like this, furry or otherwise. This does not suggest to me concern for citizens.
And I'm still trying to.
Well, let me revise that. I guess it does, but real concern would be to fix the shelter, not to shut it down and hope for the best for these animals.
Gear myself up to, because I see 2 animals in there that I want to adopt, but I'm gearing myself up to it. You know, because I had my dog pass away last year. Yeah, Luca. No, it's a white cat, and there's a dog in there that I want. So it's an all white cat with blue eyes. I like it. I want to get the cat. So, but I'm gearing myself up to it because I lost my dog last year, who died at 14, and then 4 years prior to that, my cat died at 21. So I keep my animals for life, you know. So I'm working myself up to get 2 more. But I do believe that we'll do what's in the best interest of the animals. In that regard,
all Mr. Thompson did was talk about himself. He didn't even thank this group that he just listened to, how this group has carried the ball, you know, that the city dropped for a decade. And he didn't even thank them. He just talked about himself the whole time. Unbelievable. All right. So my final thoughts on this. The Mount Vernon employees on the ground at the shelter, the friends of the Mount Vernon shelter animals, they provided much more than supplemental services. They really carried the ball that the city has dropped. And it's really the only reason the shelter, I think, survived as long as it has. The residents of the city weren't informed or included in this decision. That's really disappointing. This is, as I said, I view this as a piece of critical infrastructure. So to shut it down without having any discussion is a real bummer. I suspect that it wasn't an oversight. I suspect that this is a case of what you could call, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Because if the mayor had, remember, the mayor has been out doing town halls for the budget. She could have highlighted this in the budget when she spoke and said, we're going to do this. But if she did that, then the community response might have been negative, and there might have been pressure to say, we want you to fix the shelter, not shut it down. And if she was resolved to do this, then it behooves her not to include the community in the discussion, and instead to just afterwards say, sorry, well, maybe next time we'll do better. The alternative is it was an oversight, right? You take your pick. Either it was done knowingly to exclude us from the conversation, or they just forgot. Either way, it's not good. And it seems like the city council was informed behind closed doors, right? Gleason said that the Humane Society assured them of this. So this is not what transparency looks like at all. And this is not, of course, it's not just the failing of the Patterson-Howard administration. This goes back a long time. It's multiple administrations. I think what's disappointing about this administration is I thought, and a lot of other people thought, this was going to be different. This is suggestive of a pattern that's continued. No phone for months. That's not any different than what we've seen in prior administrations. And as a result, I think this whole thing just reeks of failure. So that's what I have to say about that.